Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Executive Insider. This is the show where global executives share their insight and knowledge to help professionals like you learn and grow. My name's JT O'Donnell. I'm your host, and today we're going to be talking to Jason Winters. He's a project management professional and executive, and he's going to share with you how to use project management in your career. So I want to bring him right up to the show. So, Jason, welcome. It's good to have you here today.
Hi, JT. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
So before we dive right into this, I just want everyone to see, what made you decide to get into project management? Because you've had an amazing career in it, but what prompted you to get into project management?
It was a little bit by accident, I think. I mean, my very first job wasn't specifically project management oriented, but when I got into the organization, that's what it was all about. It was just one thing led to another. I could see the vastness of everything that they required and everything that they could do, just the opportunities. And the fact that you were really talking to all functional areas of an organization. So you're kind of like a jack of all trades, master of some. And it's just been a huge, wonderful ride ever since then. I mean, it's been fantastic.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, you've put together an amazing slide deck for everybody today, and I want to make sure that we get right into it and leave time for questions as well. So, Jason, the first thing that I think is important for people to think about is why project management in your career. And so take it away. Share with us why it's important.
Well, I think even before the pandemic, people were talking about how project management is really a top transferable skill, right? And why is that? Because to be an effective or really successful project manager, there's really top four skills I would list. They would be communication, strategy, planning, and negotiations. So if you think about them, they're all soft skills. So even with the IoT of things, the 4.0, all the apps that are being created today, everyone trying to digitize everything. It's not always easy to do that. And I think we've all noticed and seen with the last few years, even the communication preferences, how these soft skills are actually, they're being more and more compromised, and organizations are really looking for people that can really master that type of skill set. The other thing is that project management can be really applied to any industry. If you think about it, I mean, it's virtually any company. It's scalable, large multinational companies, small companies, manufacturers, distributors, virtually any type of company can apply project management in their daily business and be successful. And the last thing is, even if you're not in project management, you don't want to follow that path as a project manager or in the project management profession, you can use those skills or even have a cursory knowledge of project management, use those skills to leverage to other positions. We'll talk about at the end of the presentation.
Yeah. And I was just actually, as you move to the next slide, I was commenting before we started, I've watched you use project management to accelerate your own career. And it's been so smartly done, right? You just have really planned things out nicely. So let's talk about that. The 10 knowledge areas of project management. What are they and why are they important?
Yeah, so these basically, if you think about it, I mean, there's lots of different areas in project management, and these come from the PMBOK. I'll talk about that in a second. But basically, project integration is basically bringing all of the bits and pieces of your project together. And that's where your negotiation skills will come into play because you have lots of trade-offs, right? You have things that you have to give up, things you have to negotiate to make sure your project moves forward. And what are those things? What are those elements that the project manager has to really be aware of? And they start with cost because you're responsible for the P&L. So you have a budget, and that budget has to be made, and your bottom line has to be achieved or bettered in order for you to be considered successful. Quality, even your organization may have quality requirements, but your project may have additional requirements, and that's really important for you to understand how you can bridge the gap between the company and the customer. Communication, like we talked about communication already, but communication is super important. But how many people are involved in your project? How do they like to communicate? When do they want to communicate? So all those things, you have to really map that out to really optimize your communication because project managers spend up to 80% of their time communicating. Stakeholder management, and that's a recent one that's just recently been added to the PMI suite. And that's really understanding anybody that can influence your project, anyone that has a positive or a negative influence on your project. You need to identify those people. You need to be really close to them. Be close to the one like standard deviations, the one that's the most supportive and the one that's the least supportive. You want to make sure that you really stay close to those people to make sure that your project is meeting their expectations and that you're staying out of trouble. Scope is another one that's really important because you need to know what you're managing. And sometimes this can be a really tricky one. We talk about scope creep and other types of scope issues where it's not clearly defined, and project teams can go astray if they're not really understanding exactly what scope has to be executed. then there's time. So obviously it's a schedule. And like many people think, oh, you just manage a schedule. Here's a schedule, manage that. Well, that's partly true, but basically your schedule really will depend on a lot of factors. All of these functional areas of the company, the stakeholders, you may have some project constraints, you may have some permits, things that can affect the time element on your project. You got to know about that. You have to be able to input those into the schedule and then be able to negotiate that. And of course, resources. What resources will you need to manage your project? Human resources and non-human resources. So let's say, what does your project team look like? Do you have any specific IT needs, infrastructure, other elements you're going to be, office space, temporary office space, whatever that might be, computers, that has to be really identified to make sure that you can execute the project with the right resources. Of course, risk. And JT, you've talked about this, previously. We've talked about this about projects really managing risk. That's a big part of project management. You have to be able to understand what those risks are, be able to mitigate those, and have a strategy to make sure that you're minimizing them, and then also reporting them to your top stakeholders so that they understand where the project is headed and where it could be headed if something were to manifest. And then procurement, right? So procurement means what you have to execute, but now you got to perhaps buy materials, subcontract services, or whatever that is. You have to make sure that those materials and services are in accordance with the project requirements, with your stakeholder requirements, and that they're compliant, either in the country that you're working or in the industry that you're working. So if you think about it, when you bring all these areas together, I always say a project manager manages a business within a business.
And I love that statement, because if you look behind me, I have "you are a business of one," right? Which my executive peers gave me. And I love this because I talk about that. So it's fascinating to see you break this down. As you were going through each one, I could see how when it comes to your career, you could tie that to an aspect of your career and manage your career like a project in order to get the results, which is wonderful. I also think that anybody out there listening that enjoys multitasking, that really enjoys that ownership and that accountability, is going to love leveraging project management. And then the final thing I wanted to share with you, Jason, is that the one thing I always remember when I worked in corporate America, in project managers would say the goal is to make it on time and under budget. And that all of these things that you just spoke of are how we get there, which I think is fantastic. So that being said, there are schools of thought around project management, and you actually have the certification that goes after your name. I was really fascinated when you broke this down. I hadn't seen these different options. So take people through how the different uses of these types of project management thought.
Okay, so the project management profession, actually, as officially as it's known, has been around for 50 years officially. And that was when the Project Management Institute was founded in 1969. And basically, they created a list of procedures, philosophies, guidelines for project managers called the PMBOK, or the Project Management Body of Knowledge. And that alludes to the 11 the knowledge areas we just talked about. And basically, that's been around, and used widely throughout all types of companies. But really, it's really tailored towards the larger industrial projects with a very long duration, like projects that could last 5 years, 10 years. The Olympics, for example, it's going to be a 7 or 8 years planning cycle. So this type of project management tends to be a little bit more bureaucratic also. It also has a little bit more options as far as career path. But basically, it really tries to bring in all of those knowledge areas that we've been talking about and apply it to basically any industry or any type of company. Well, in 2001, fast forward, people thought, what, that's great, but it's a little bit, bureaucratic. I mean, let's streamline some of this, because really, if you have to follow every single knowledge area, every single project plan that you're talking about, that could really not work for shorter projects. So the Agile movement was founded, and that's really popular, and it has been for the last several years. Mm-hmm. And basically, it was founded in 2001 via the Agile Manifesto. And basically, the idea is to streamline, accelerate the project where possible. And actually, they formed an alliance with the PMI just a few years back. And in last year, the last edition of the PMBOK, the 7th edition, the Agile philosophy has actually been added to the PMBOK as an option, as another way of managing projects. But basically, it's used on smaller duration projects. Let's say IT. So you really see a lot of it in the IT space, where people with technology, the faster you go to market with new technologies, the better. So an agile project management philosophy would be really more recommended for that, because you really could literally have a project that lasts 6 months, even less. like an app, you want to develop a new app, it could be 6 months. So really you want to make sure that you've got a way to be more agile and less bureaucratic. And then the third one is hybrid. So hybrid really is nothing more than just a mixture of the two. So if you look at that, you can mix and match however you want. And you can say, like, in this project, I'll be more waterfall, but I'll have an agile mindset, right? And actually, I've always been like that. Even before agile was invented, I always thought, you know what? Let's always be as agile as possible, but within the rules of the project plan. So actually, hybrid is the most widely followed philosophy today, and it really is the trend going forward. So I don't see that stopping, and I think it's actually a really good thing.
Oh, I agree. And if anybody's out there thinking about getting into this in a career, I mean, agile methods, I'm constantly seeing that in job descriptions. It definitely is something that's getting widely embraced. So probably a good thing to make sure they know all three, like you said, so they can leverage that hybrid. So let's go into the good part, careers in project management. When you showed me this slide, I got really excited because I don't think people understand there's just, if you're somebody that's looking for career progression that is both linear but also could pivot, really project management's sort of endless in its options after I saw this. So talk us through it.
Yeah, so really you got two types of project managers, and you've actually probably see that when you see job postings. Either they want a technical project manager or a non-technical project manager. So technical project managers usually are like engineers or IT professionals, where you have a specific skill set, a specific degree, a specific certification that will be required on a project, right? And then you have non-technical, which would be everything else. But even though you may not be technical, you could still lead a technical project. It just depends on how well you adapt and how much you can absorb. But basically, you have two types of ways to go there. But if you look at a more traditional approach to project management, I use the one that has all the positions to make it easier. But some people have more, some people have less. But in like the oil and gas space, where I have my experience, you start really off as a project expediter. And what do? Basically, they're taking parts of the schedule that the project schedule feeds to them and accelerating them like an expediter. So making sure that things are not late and trying to make sure that things get accelerated as much as possible. Well, the scheduler, and you could have multiple expediters, by the way, depending on how big your project is. You could have one for, you could have 10 or 15 or 20. Project scheduler, same thing. You can have multiple schedulers, but basically they're responsible for actually physically building the schedule, which becomes the baseline of the project team. So they'll have all the activities that are required based on the scope, and they'll be able to analyze all of the dependencies and interdependencies and relationships between those activities to calculate the critical path and other things that need to be highlighted as risks, as possible schedule risks to the project coordinator. Then the project coordinator will take that information. Usually it's in a MS Projects or a Primavera format. The project coordinator will then analyze that information along with other information coming from the different functional areas to make sure that all of the project reports that are required, the finance reports, the operational reports, the quality reports, they're all there in the micro minutia, and not really analyzing them to a certain extent, but not necessarily reporting them back to the external stakeholders. That's the project manager that usually does that. So by the time the project manager gets involved, all this work's already been done. And so what the project manager has to do is analyze for any discrepancies, any gaps, any problems, any opportunities, and then start engaging the stakeholders in each of those specific areas to negotiate deals that are favorable to the project, right? So they will then issue the official project reports that have to be sent out, on monthly or weekly or however they are. So that happens on that specific project. Once that's been done, a project manager wants to have another bump. It's project director. So what a project director does basically will greenlight the project. Usually, we call them the sponsor of the project. So what they do, remove obstacles for the project team, negotiate at a little bit higher level. Usually it's a little bit more political, making sure that they are supporting the project at all times. And also at any given point, they could pull the plug or stop the project if they feel like it's not going in the right direction. And that's what we call project governance. And that's a subject for another session. But then you also have what you call the PMO manager. So the PMO, or the project management office, basically is the portfolio manager of all the projects for an organization. So basically, they will then have the responsibility to have project procedures that need to be followed by all the project teams and be responsible for staffing and allocating project managers to certain projects, basically. And during audits, they would be the one that would be audited during a project audit. Then you have the vice president. So the vice president of projects will be even a higher level position. It's a little bit more strategic to make sure that those projects that are being vetted, they're being executed also in accordance with top management requirements. But they will also have a vision of how that project fits within the company's vision. And they will see that in the future, maybe other types of projects could and should be pursued as a result of that. So then you have other ones that are a little bit more functional, like project risk. So if you look at the risk, the engineering, the quality, the finance, and the cost, those are all specific functional managerial level positions that you can have in a project that are specifically related to those activities that are specific project parts of the project plan. So really, it's pretty, like you said, it's pretty endless. And really, what are the companies that are hiring this type of position? It's producers, oil and gas producers, renewables, end users, service companies, engineering, procurement, distribution, manufacturing. So depending on the type and size of the company, it's good to actually ask them what their project management structure looks like, so you can see how your progression could occur within that organization.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's just amazing that there's so much career progression and opportunity within the space, to make an entire career out of it. But that being said, you also feel project management can be used in other professions and have some examples here. So talk us through that.
Yeah, so even if you're not really interested in being in the project management profession, you might even have just some knowledge of it, or you have had an experience, didn't like it, and you want to do something else, that's fine. But I thought about just 4 positions you could, right off the bat, that you could use this type of skill set. One is business development. So if you think about it, business development is not just a glorified sales position, right? What are the skills required to be really an effective business developer, right? You need to know marketing, sales, supply chain. You need to have a knowledge of the competitive landscape, obviously. Business intelligence. You need to understand who the stakeholders are also for those business transactions. Credit. Are your customers financially stable? Are they vetted? Are they compliant? Do they have any issues with compliance? And also from resources. Do you have the resources? Does your company have the resources and the supply chain required to meet your customers' demands? Supply chain. So we just talked about supply chain, but if you look at supply chain as itself, as its own department, you really need to have a lot of things just purchasing, right? So you need to know what are the business requirements. So your customer business requirements, the statutory, the regulatory. You need to have authorized vendors. Some customers actually want to approve your vendors. Credit again. Exchange rates. Everything's international. It has been for the last 30 plus years. So you are subject to currency exchange worldwide. So you have to understand how that can affect your business. Import export restrictions and logistics. So logistics, we know it's just a mess right now. So you need to understand all those nuances to make sure that you can provide all of the products and services that the business needs to be able to handle the customers. And of course, any restrictions or licenses. HR. This is something some people don't really think about, but if you're in HR, you're not just hiring and firing. What else are you doing? We say you're a business partner. Of course you are. You have to interface with all the departments. You have to understand the needs of all departments. That means you have to get into the head of each department, and what is the skill set required for each of those positions. You also have to know about location differences in locations and labor laws, and negotiations with unions if you have unions. Employee contracts, how those work. Stuff like that. You have to be really well-rounded to be able to offer and provide value to your organization. And then quality. Quality interfacing with all departments to make sure that you have customer and product requirements covered, and that you also are in accordance with your industry norms, regulations, country requirements, anything special, and of course be ready for audits. And when you auditing in itself is art. It's a process. It's negotiation. It's communication. You have to know how to conduct an audit and be successful at it. So I think you can use it really, like I said, it's communication, it's strategy, planning, and negotiation. But you can use those skills really in all these roles.
Love it. So true. So project management, literally in any aspect. So we're going to take questions in just a minute. We're going to give Jason a chance to catch his breath. That was amazing, Jason. I think you have definitely convinced everyone project management is everywhere and can be leveraged quite successfully in your career. Folks, if you have a question, feel free to pop it in the chat. I would love to post the question and answer those for you with Jason while we have him here. But Jason, I want to ask you, I want to bring you up on the screen here, and I want to ask you a question. When it comes to getting your project management certification, can you quickly share with everybody how long that takes? And, is there an end in sight? Are there levels? Just walk everyone through that lightly.
Yeah, there are levels. It depends on really, there's agile certifications and there's PMP certifications and there's, certified associate project manager it's all available on the project management website, the PMI Institute. So basically each one has its own level of experience required. So a minimum number of years that you actually have been working in the profession. So you don't just become a project manager overnight, right? So usually it takes at least 5 years in the profession. But the specific requirements as far as, how many hours that you have to have been working in the profession. And then there's exams to pass. You have to pass an exam. And then once you pass that exam, then you will have updates. You'll have, professional development units or PDUs that have to be fulfilled, like continuing education over a certain period of time. For the PMP certification, it's every 3 years and you have to have 60 PDUs.
Interesting. And do you think that, for example, in your line of work, the PMP is really required because of the complexity of the projects that you do in the oil and gas industry, for example? You have to have the PMP. But if people didn't want to get the PMP certification, do you think there are still is it still worthwhile, I guess, to, maybe go take a course on project management, even if you don't want to go through certification?
Yeah, really, it depends on the organization. And I would say study the skill sets, or you could even pick the brains of people that work in certain types of industries or organizations. But I'd say oil and gas, the trend is in the last 10 years. Really 10 years ago is when I got my certification, although I'd already been working in the profession for, almost 15 years. And it wasn't actually required at the time, but everybody was getting it. And I said, my project managers are going to have that certification. I had a directive from top management. So I said, if I'm going to require them to have it, I might as well get it myself. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. So I did it. Don't regret it, because it is a differentiator. Definitely. People respect it. And again, you can use it across industries. So it really helps you bridge a lot of gaps. So I'd say it's definitely worth it.
Right. We have a question from Melody. She says, what type of minimal training would you recommend for training up new managers in the non-technical roles? So that's a great question. So they just get better at managing if you're in business or HR or some of those other non-technical types.
I think and thanks for that question, Melody. I think it's communication. It's communication skills, right? So if you want to up your people into managerial roles, it's being able to relate to and understand how to manage people. When I say manage people, maybe the right term is to lead people, right? So really, I'd say analyze your skills, and then we have these 360-degree evaluations that we do to analyze your skill set and say, look, here are the gaps that we identified in your position. Here are your strong points. Here are your points that we think you can make a little bit of progress on. So, give them a plan that's adapted to that person, but also depending on where they want to go with it, right? So I'd say, what are your aspirations? Where do you see yourself in the next position, or maybe in the next 5 years? And I think good managers, and not having to rely on HR, a good manager or a good leader should be actually giving that advice anyway, at least once a year, if not more, during reviews.
Yeah, it's interesting. You always talk about those things that project management brings. So maybe assessing them against those and determining what they need to work on in order to be a better project manager makes total sense. Lynn has a question. She wants to know if you use any project management software in your daily processes. Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, very good question. Actually, me personally, no, because really I just use the Microsoft Office suite of software, because all the reports I do are just in Microsoft Office suite compatible formats. But if you are a project scheduler, for example, they use Microsoft Projects, or they use Primavera, or there's a whole bunch of project management apps that have come out recently. And I'd say maybe a lot of those I don't say they're more tailored towards the agile type projects, because agile is not my specialty per se, but me specifically in a higher, executive project management role, really it's the Microsoft suite.
Got it. Excellent. Wow. Okay. Time went really fast here. So we are going to wrap it up for today. If you have more questions for Jason, you should contact him. And he was kind enough to put all of his information up here. You can reach him at LinkedIn. Obviously, you can head on over to Work It Daily, our website. All you have to do is search Jason Winter's name. He has got some unbelievable articles about project management on the Work It Daily site. They can really help you. So please go search for him there. And you have got to check him out on TikTok. He is doing phenomenal work on TikTok, giving you these amazing 60-second sound bites on project management. I mean, you will go down the rabbit hole. You can watch all of his TikToks and learn so much about project management in such a short time. It's one of the reasons I love TikTok for executives. So wonderful places to check Jason out. Jason, thank you so much for your time. I want to give you back the mic for kind of final comments of the day. Any final thoughts or recommendations for the audience?
I would just say, look, project management really continues to be a really sometimes misunderstood profession. Sometimes the people think they know what it is, but not always know what it is. And again, it's so vast that it's more than really meets the eye anyway. So it's really adapting it to your reality and how you can use it, and even bits and pieces. You don't have to use the entire part of it, but some of the overall concepts can really help you actually out in other types of roles besides just being an actual project manager. But I mean, I've written articles about this before, how you can actually use it to run your life if you want to. Mm-hmm. So, it just depends on how you want to look at it. But I'd say really it's an exciting profession, and I've been through it my entire career, and I continue to see the value of it, and it really continues to get me out of bed every day.
I love it. And I think that's the secret to being a successful global executive, especially in project management. You have a passion for it. It's very clear that you care about it, and you see this as like a lifelong learning opportunity, which is amazing. So Jason, thank you again. Very valuable information. Thank you to our audience today for participating in your questions. And I cannot wait to see you next time when we're back here on Executive Insider. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.